How would you know if God invited you? In Revelation chapter 3 verse 20, we were told, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him, and he with me." How would we know if God has come to the door and that we've invited him in? That's what we're going to look into and find out in this video. But before we get into anything else, we first have to figure out what we're even being invited into. We were given a glimpse of what that is in Hebrews 12:28, where we were told that we're supposed to serve God fervently. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace, whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. So an example that I know of people in the Bible who were invited and then served God properly were those who heard Peter's sermon in Acts chapter 2 verses 37 to 47. The verse telling us that they were invited by God was verse 37, and that verse tells us, "When they heard this, they were pricked in their heart." The phrase pricked in their heart means that God had called them and opened their hearts to his word. And for the rest of the chapter, they served God and did everything that Peter asked them to. But now that we've covered what it means to be invited and what we're being invited into, we now need to get into how we'll even know if we've been invited in the first place. One way that we'll know if God has invited us is if we're on God's side of the matter at all times. If a matter comes up in conversation, or there's a decision that you have to take, or anything like that really, you'll base your decisions, actions, and arguments from the scriptures, which tells us God's position on the matter. An example of people who took God's side of things against all odds are Joshua and Caleb. In Numbers chapter 13, 12 spies were sent out to Canaan to check out the land. When they returned, Joshua and Caleb were on the side of God, believing in the mission and in God who took them there, knowing full well that they'd be able to possess the land. However, the other 10 spies were a little different. They were on the other side, Satan the devil's side, telling the people that it was impossible to achieve. However, Joshua and Caleb stayed on the side of God, even when the Israelites wanted to stone them to death for their position. But I think I've spent enough time on that matter, so moving on, another way to know if God has invited you or not is if your life has changed a lot post-invitation. And what do I even mean by that? Well, if we look at those who were originally in sin but then changed to being righteous, their lives were completely different afterwards. An example is Manasseh, who in 2 Chronicles 33 was a very evil king who worshipped tons of gods, used witchcraft, and so on and so forth. God let him be thrown in jail, and in there, God invited him, or called him, you could say. Manasseh repented in prison, and when he came out, he completely changed everything he did before. He removed all the idols he set up and destroyed the altars he created to worship other gods, and served God, Jehovah, only. As you can see, he became a whole new person, a new creature, as Paul had said in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 17. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. So, if this has happened to you, you've been invited by God. But there's one last thing that tells us if we've been invited by God or not, and that's if things of God, like the scriptures, his plans, his principles, and things like that, are exciting to us. Spiritual topics are what excites us, as David said in Psalm chapter 122 verse 1. "I was glad when they said unto me, Let us go into the house of the Lord." Nothing else would have been able to give us that level of joy. If we do find anything more fun or exciting, that means we haven't received that invitation yet. We find an example of the difference between those who have been invited and those who hadn't with Martha and Mary in Luke 10 verses 38 to 42. In those verses, Jesus visited the sister's house, and Mary sat down at his feet to listen to him teach. Martha, on the other hand, didn't pay attention, as what Jesus was saying meant nothing to her, and instead went to go cook him food, even telling Jesus to tell her sister to come and join her. Jesus' response to this was this: "Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things. But one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her." So, what do we get from all this? Well, we're being invited to serve God with all our hearts, and in the end, we'd obtain salvation from that, according to Psalm chapter 37, verse 11. We know if we've received this special invitation, if our lives pre-invitation is completely different from our lives post-invitation, and the things of God excite us a lot, and that's what we find the funnest and most interesting. And finally, if we're always on the side of God in all matters, in conversation, in decision, etc. But that's the end of this video. If you want to see more of my videos and be notified, then you can always like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you'll be notified of when I post again. Have a great day, and I'd love to see you back here soon.